Hi, Getty from GettyStewart.com here with frequently asked questions about roasting tomatoes. And without any further ado, let's get to 7 commonly asked questions about roasting tomatoes. Number 1, what kind of tomato is best for roasted tomatoes? So really, any tomato that you have access to will work as a roasted tomato. So you can use large field or slicing tomatoes. You can use store-bought tomatoes. You can use paste tomatoes, your Romas or your San Marzano. The only tomatoes I would not recommend are underripe or green tomatoes. These just won't give you the flavor that you're looking for. So for sure, not green tomatoes. Underripe tomatoes, you can maybe use 1 or 2 in a full pan, but again, they just won't give you the flavor that you want. So the difference between a slicing tomato and a paste tomato is that these are much meatier and these are much juicier or more liquid inside. So if you want a thick sauce or thick slices for your pasta dish, then a paste tomato will give you that thicker sauce and that thicker, meatier flavor. The slicing tomatoes can be used as well. You would just roast them a little bit longer to evaporate more of the liquid, but really any variety will work. The next question is, how do you cut your tomatoes for roasting? And I wanted to show you a couple of options depending on your final use. Now, if you want roasted tomatoes to put on top of pasta or focaccia or toast or whatever, then I would recommend this approach where you are slicing thick slices. You could even do halves, but that will just take a little bit longer. I really recommend 1/2-inch slices and laid out on a sheet pan, spread apart so that there's nice roasting going on rather than steaming. So this is if you're looking for a topping. If you are making a sauce and looks don't really matter, then go ahead and chop up your tomatoes just so that they're uniform size, about 1-inch cubes or slices or dices. It doesn't really matter what shape they're in, because a full pan like this is going to steam. It's going to get charred a little bit on top, but it's really going to steam, and for sauce, you just want to get the job done. This is great if you have a lot of tomatoes to process. So slices or thinner cuts for toppings, and whatever you can make and chop, about 1-inch size pieces for making sauces. Should you remove the green stem from your tomatoes? So the answer to this question is it really depends on your preference and what you're going for. So I like to remove it when I'm making something where presentation does matter and I'm using these as is on a recipe. Then I like to remove the stem end. When I'm making a sauce, a pan like this, where everything's going to be either pureed or put through my food mill, then I don't worry so much about removing the green stem end in the tomatoes. So totally your preference. How do you place your tomatoes on the pan? So again, here you see I've spaced them out a little bit more. This encourages browning and roasting rather than just steaming. And you also notice that I have put the tomatoes cut side up, and that allows the liquid to evaporate a little bit more quickly than if they were cut side down. So that's my preference, is cut side up. Again, when I'm making the sauce, like on this one, just willy-nilly, just get them on the pan and get the job done is really what's happening on this pan. So you see I've double, triple stacked these tomatoes. There's going to be a lot of steaming going on here, a little bit less roasting on this one than on this one where they're spread apart. So again, total personal preference. The big question: what temperature should I use to roast my tomatoes? Now, typically I use somewhere between 350 or 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will take about 45 to 60 minutes for a pan like this, a little less for a pan like that. I like that particular temperature because it gives a little bit of charring, but it gets the cooking job done in a reasonable amount of time. And I don't have to check too often for the charring and the over browning. Now, if you like that browning and a little bit of charred flavor to your roasted tomatoes, then go ahead and pump up the heat to 425, 450 degrees even. You'll get a pan like this, will take you 20 minutes, and you'll get lots of nice browning going on. You do have to check it to make sure that browning doesn't turn to blackening. So just be aware if you're jacking up the heat. If you want to go low and slow and you want to have more of a flavor like a sun-dried tomato, then go ahead and bring the heat way down to about 250 degrees. And then it's more like you're almost dehydrating, getting that sun-dried tomato flavor and texture where you're really evaporating a lot of the liquid. It's a great option. It'll take you about 4 hours though, so just be prepared for that kind of oven time. Another question I'm asked is, what additional ingredients can I use with my roasted tomatoes? So for sure you can use onions, garlic, hot peppers, fresh herbs, especially hearty herbs like thyme, rosemary, oregano. I would not use fresh basil because it'll just burn and turn bitter. You can use garlic, and I use smashed garlic so that it stays in larger pieces and won't burn to a crisp right away. You could also use dried herbs like this Italian seasoning mix, which I've used on this pan. You can add salt and pepper as well. So you notice that on this pan here, there's the onions, there's some hot peppers that I've sliced open. You decide whether or not to keep the seeds in there, but I tuck things in so that they are not the things that are going to get charred right away. Even on this pan with the sliced pieces, I've tucked the garlic into the tomatoes, into the most liquidy part, so that they won't get charred right away. The hot peppers, I've made sure that I've drizzled with oil. Now I do expect that they'll char a little bit. I just don't want them to burn to a crisp. So those are some of the additional ingredients that I like to add. And finally, how do you can roasted tomatoes? So if you want to, put them in a can on the shelf, how do you can tomatoes, roasted tomatoes? So because tomatoes are a borderline acidic vegetable, they require acid added to them whenever you're canning. Now, when we roast them, we're taking a lot of the liquid away. We're adding other ingredients possibly. We're adding some oil. So there's lots of different variables that we're adding that will make them potentially unsafe to can. So the top tip here is follow a recipe that is intended for canning roasted tomatoes. Now on my link and down below, I'll show you a couple of recipes that are intended for canning. So don't just use any recipe. Make sure it's tried, tested, and true to ensure that you are canning roasted tomatoes safely. And that should involve the addition of acid and probably not the use of oil and limited amount of additional ingredients. So make sure that you use that tested recipe. And those are the top 7 questions for roasted tomatoes. Come back, I'm going to show you the end result for these. In 25 minutes at 375, you can see the steam coming off of these tomatoes. And I just wanted to show you the difference. See here, all the charring, the peppers are pretty charred. There's a piece of garlic in there, protected by the tomato, but starting to char. So those are roasted tomato slices, coated in oil. The sheet pan was oiled, and that is what I would take off and serve with pasta, and it's going to be so delicious. The saucy pan, you see that there's a lot of liquid going on there, but there is also some browning. Certainly the hot pepper there's a little bit of charring and browning on the tomatoes on the outside. But this one still has a long way to go. I would not consider this finished. I'm just going to rotate, stir a little bit, get those charred tomatoes from the outside, and I want some of that liquid to cook right off. So I'm going to put these back in the oven and let them go probably another good 15-20 minutes. I'm going to be taking these tomatoes and running them through my food mill and getting a really beautiful sauce from that. You could also puree the whole contents of the tray using a blender or an immersion blender and get a lovely sauce from that. You can use them just the way they are, or if you don't have an immediate source for them, you can also cool completely, freeze them as is, and then use them when you're ready, 6 months to a year. You can puree them and freeze that. You can make a sauce, add additional flavorings and freeze that. So lots of options for you for using these tomatoes. And you know, there's some great recipes on GettyStewart.com, a roasted tomato soup recipe. Very shortly there's going to be a roasted tomato focaccia recipe. So many delicious things. If you have any questions or comments, visit me at GettyStewart.com.